The weight of the paper in my hand was feather-light, but the burden it carried felt like the entirety of the steel-reinforced concrete structure I'd spent the last year modeling. It was Christmas Day, precisely 11:43 a.m., in my parents' meticulously maintained but always slightly chilly Chicago home. The scent of roasting ham and stale cinnamon hung heavy in the air, but the atmosphere itself was thin, brittle. My sister, Sloane, stood by the massive stone fireplace, holding a crystal tumbler of mimosa, her face flushed with a mixture of excitement and feigned modesty. She was 30, 4 years my junior, and today she was the undisputed sun around which our family orbited. I can't believe it, Daddy," Sloane breathed, her voice carrying the theatrical tremor she'd perfected since childhood. A historic Greystone, complete, debt-free, and already furnished with antiques. You two are insane. My father, Richard, a man whose love was always denominated in dollars and real estate, beamed. It's time you had an anchor, sweetheart. Something beautiful that reflects your artistic nature. He adjusted his silk tie, his chest puffed out like a proud robin. The Greystone, a certified landmark in Lincoln Park, was valued conservatively at $3.5 million. It was the latest, most spectacular entry in Sloane's lifetime ledger of parental investment. I, Alara, 34, a senior structural engineer specializing in seismic resilience, sat on the edge of a mahogany chair, my hands clasped tightly around my own Christmas gift, a small velvet pouch. I hadn't even opened it yet. I didn't need to. I already knew what it represented. My mother, Beatrice, glided over to me, her expression shifting instantly from Sloane's adoring light to a look of practiced, strained concern, the same look she wore when discussing my lack of a fiancé or my firm's demanding hours. Now, Alara, honey, she began, placing a cool, manicured hand on my shoulder. We know you're always so incredibly practical and so responsible. You don't need the kind of hand-holding your sister needs. I nodded, maintaining the polite, detached smile that was my primary defense mechanism during family gatherings. Responsible, practical, independent. These were the words they used to describe me. I realized for the first time with searing clarity they weren't compliments. They were a euphemism for unworthy of effort. They were the code for, you cost us less, so we value you less. Open yours, darling, Mom prompted, patting the velvet pouch. Inside was a tarnished, slightly chipped silver locket. It was cheap, not vintage, just old and poorly made, with a hastily engraved E on the back. Oh, that's just lovely, Mom, I said, forcing warmth into my voice. It's a family heirloom, dear, she stated, slightly too loudly, overriding the small, nagging voice in my head that knew the silver content was likely 0. Belonged to your great-aunt Evelyn. We always knew you, our sensible engineer, would appreciate the sentiment more than the flash. The locket was the sentimental deflection. The real insult was the document. And this, Dad announced, holding out a single sheet of paper. This is for the future. I took the paper. It wasn't a bank draft. It was a promissory note, an IOU, a signed, notarized commitment to contribute $50,000 towards a future down payment on a residence. Isn't that wonderful, Alara? Mom asked, leaning closer. A significant contribution. A recognition of all your hard work. My eyes scanned the fine print, the language I, as a trained contract analyst in large-scale construction, instantly understood. The funds were contingent upon approval of the property by Richard and Beatrice Vance. Payment would be made directly to the title company, not to me, ensuring it remained an advance against the future estate. The amount was a loan that may be called back if the property was sold within 5 years. And critically, the amount was listed as a taxable gift to our income on my 1099, resulting in a net cost to me after capital gains. The paper was worthless. It was not a gift of support, it was a gift of control. It was designed to keep me tethered, seeking their approval for a paltry sum, while Sloan received a completely free multi-million-dollar asset with no strings attached. I looked from the paper in my hand, a promise of conditional controlled debt, to Sloan, sipping champagne, the owner of a 3-story Greystone. Sloan's car was in the garage, her tuition, her endless artistic exploration trips to Europe, her crippling credit card debt, all erased. My life's worth, as calculated by the Vance family ledger, was $50,000 that came with a tax bill and the surrender of my autonomy. I placed the locket gently on the side table, smoothing the IOU on my lap. I felt a slow, terrible cold spread through my chest, an emotional cavitation. The years of striving, achieving, and proving my responsibility had led to this. I was their most valuable asset because I was the least expensive to maintain. "It's not enough," I heard my own voice say. It was quiet, clear, and unfamiliar. My parents froze. Sloan even lowered her mimosa glass. "Pardon me?" my father asked, his face tightening instantly. I said, "It's not enough," I repeated, rising to my feet. I held the IOU up, pointing to a clause. "The Greystone is valued at $3.5 million. It's paid in full, and it's an unconditional gift. This is a taxable, callable, conditional IOU for $50,000. Assuming a generous 40% combined tax rate and factoring in the time value of money lost waiting for your approval, my net benefit here is about $28,000, and my obligation is endless servitude." My mother's face crumpled immediately into her signature expression of martyr-like injury. "Elara, how can you talk about money on Christmas? It's the sentiment that matters." This from the girl who gives us stock options. "Yes, Mom, I give you stock options because I am a responsible, successful, financially sovereign adult who can afford to give you unconditional, generous gifts," I countered, feeling a fierce, cleansing fire rise in my throat. "I don't give you IOUs. I don't give you tax liabilities. I don't tie my gifts to your approval of my life choices. I gave you the gift of never having to worry about me." I walked over to the fireplace and placed the IOU directly into the burning logs. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished almost instantly. My father bellowed, "What in God's name are you doing? That's a legal document." "It was a legal threat of control, Dad." "Now it's ash." I picked up the silver locket. "And this isn't my great-aunt Evelyn's locket." My mother's side of the family never had an Evelyn. "You bought this at a novelty store 2 weeks ago when you realized you had forgotten to get me a trinket, didn't you, Mom?" My mother burst into genuine theatrical tears. "You are ungrateful. After everything we sacrificed for you to go to that engineering school. You paid for my state school tuition, which I supplemented with scholarships and 3 part-time jobs. You paid for Sloan's private art school, her gap year, and her endless professional training," I stated, my voice steady, my gaze locked on my mother's performative weeping. "I am not ungrateful. I am calculating. And my calculation is this: my worth to you is exactly the cost of a last-minute lie and a conditional loan designed to keep me under your thumb." I looked at Sloan, whose face was pale, finally understanding the weight of her Greystone. She wasn't free. She was a golden bird in a gilded cage. "Enjoy the house, Sloan." "I hope it feels like home," I said, truly meaning it. And then I looked at my parents. and for the first time in 34 years, I saw them not as authority figures, but as two people whose emotional calculus was fatally flawed. I'm leaving, and I'm done being your responsible, independent daughter who doesn't need hand-holding. You won't have to worry about the stock options or the complicated holiday scheduling ever again. You only have to worry about Sloan. Now I turned, walked out of the living room, retrieved my overnight bag from the hall closet, and left the Chicago home that was never truly mine. It was 11:51 a.m. I didn't stop, I didn't look back, and I didn't say goodbye. My car was a practical, 5-year-old Subaru Forester, fully paid off. It was parked 2 blocks away, a deliberate choice to avoid blocking the driveway where Sloan's latest, brightest vehicle usually sat. I drove out of Lincoln Park, the Greystone shimmering in the rearview mirror like a monument to financial disease. The moment my fingers left the steering wheel at a stoplight, I went through my phone. I opened my parents' contact pages. Richard Vance, Beatrice Vance. I selected block contact on both. Then Sloan. Then my Uncle Robert, who always played the familial mediator. The sudden silence of the digital disconnect was jarring. No immediate calls, no frantic texts, no digital noise to interrupt the emotional screaming in my head. I had severed the cord in the most final modern way. I didn't drive home to my own condo. I couldn't bear to be in a place where I knew they had the address, the keys, the power to show up unannounced. Instead, I drove to the one safe harbor I had. My best friend, Aisha Khan. Aisha, a brilliant data scientist, and my college roommate, lived in a loft apartment in the West Loop. When she opened the door, I didn't offer a greeting, a summary, or an explanation. I simply handed her my phone. Block the rest of them, and book me a one-way ticket to Seattle, tomorrow morning. The earliest flight, Aisha didn't flinch. She was the one person who knew the Vance family ledger better than I did, having witnessed 20 years of it. She took the phone, looked at my face, and without a word, guided me to her sofa, poured 2 fingers of amber-colored whiskey, and sat beside me. "The Greystone," she stated, not as a question, but as a summary. "The Greystone and an IOU," I corrected, sipping the whiskey. "A conditional, taxable IOU for $50,000, Aisha. They paid cash for a $3.5 million house for Sloan because she's artistic and needs stability, and for me, the senior structural engineer, they offered a callable loan requiring their permission for my own property." I set the whiskey down, my hand shaking. I have $1.2 million in personal liquid assets. I could buy and furnish the Greystone 3 times over and still be solvent. And they offered me a threat of control disguised as an advance on an inheritance I don't need, linked to a locket they bought at the airport gift shop. Aisha nodded slowly, scrolling through the flight options on my phone. "They didn't do it because they think you need the money, Alara. They did it because they think you need them. They bought Sloan's dependence. They tried to buy yours. And I am done being the responsible one," I whispered, tears finally falling, hot and unexpected. "The one who makes the complicated life easy for them. The one who cleans up Sloan's financial messes. The one who has to earn their presence. My work is literally designed to withstand natural disaster, but my emotional core has the seismic resilience of wet sand." Aisha pressed the purchase button for a 6 a.m. flight out of O'Hare. "Seattle it is. They won't look for you there. It's far enough and close enough to a major structural engineering hub. You need to start over, Alara, not with a clean slate, but with a clean ledger. We'll call your firm tomorrow and arrange the leave of absence." The move to Seattle was swift, brutal, and utterly necessary. I sold my condo to a faceless corporation, transferring the funds to an account in a different state, under a new bank. I took only the essentials: my professional portfolio, my tools, and a small box of things I truly loved, including the one thing my father gave me without condition: a vintage drafting compass from his own school days. The tarnished silver locket I still carried, not as a trinket, but as a talisman of the betrayal. I took a 6-month sabbatical from my Chicago firm, pretending it was for personal health reasons. The truth was, I couldn't face the idea of going back to work under the assumption that my parents knew exactly where I was, exactly what I was doing. In Seattle, with Aisha's help, I rented a starkly modern, high-ceilinged loft in the Fremont district, an area known for its vibrant architecture and independent spirit. It was the antithesis of the staid, historic Chicago environment I'd always known. During the first 3 months, I did nothing but sleep, read, and attend sessions with my therapist, Dr. Sorensen. Dr. Sorensen was a woman in her late 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She didn't coddle. She challenged. "Alara," she said during our 4th session, holding up her notebook. "The central problem isn't the Greystone or the IOU. It's that your parents created an emotional economy where your usefulness was your currency. You became a hyper-competent child because your parents only acknowledged the things they didn't have to pay for: your grades, your scholarship, your career success. They rewarded Sloane's need because that made them feel powerful. They punished your independence because it made them feel obsolete." She tapped her pen on the desk. "Your first assignment is to stop being useful to everyone but yourself. No professional calls, no pro bono work, no cleaning up Aisha's apartment. Just be." It was the hardest assignment of my life. I felt physically itchy, my hands craving the weight of a blueprint or the texture of a calculation. But I followed her instruction. I walked the city, not seeing buildings as structural problems to solve, but as aesthetic objects to be admired. I started to notice the light, the texture, the flow. Then, one rainy afternoon, while exploring a warehouse district, I saw a sign: "Glass Blowing and Metal Art Studio." I walked in on impulse and signed up for a beginner's course in welding and metal fabrication. For the next 2 months, I spent 6 hours a day in a welding mask, my mind focusing entirely on the heat of the acetylene torch and the precise, careful manipulation of metal. It was the opposite of structural engineering. Structural engineering was about preventing movement. Metal art was about shaping it. I learned to create curves, to texture surfaces, to make things that were purely beautiful and utterly useless in a practical, professional sense. I made a series of small, intricate metal sculptures, abstract shapes that represented my emotional state, sharp angles giving way to smooth, sweeping arcs. They were just for me. The welding studio became my sanctuary, separating the responsible Alara from the sovereign Alara. As my sabbatical drew to a close, I realized I couldn't return to Chicago. I couldn't go back to the firm that the Vances were vaguely aware of, the firm I had joined immediately after college. I needed professional severance as profound as my personal one. I started Eon Design. It wasn't a large firm, it was just me. My specialty was sustainable, seismically resilient residential architecture, designing beautiful homes that could survive the inevitable, combining my structural expertise with the newfound aesthetic sensibility I had discovered in the welding studio. My first contract was designing a low-impact multi-unit building in Ballard. My second was a custom home on Bainbridge Island. My fees were high, my work was meticulous, and my boundaries were absolute. I worked directly with clients, cutting out the bureaucratic waste I had spent a decade navigating. I was building a legacy entirely of my own design. No IOUs, no cosigners, no parental approval required. I was finally an independent contractor in every sense of the word. My new life was an architecture of intentionality. Aisha relocated to Seattle for a massive tech contract 6 months after I did, and we established our chosen family rituals: Sunday brunches, spontaneous hikes, and mandatory movie nights where we were forbidden to discuss work or family drama. I met Rian 3 months after launching Eon Design. He was a landscape architect, and we met when we were both bidding on the Bainbridge Island project. He lost the bid, but he won my attention. Ryan was the opposite of the type of man my parents had always pushed me toward: the safe, successful, but emotionally bland financial analyst. Rian had dirt under his fingernails, a chaotic but brilliant mind, and a deep respect for the earth. Our first date was walking through a massive arboretum. He didn't ask about my family, my past, or my financial portfolio. He asked me about the root systems of the ancient cedars and how a truly great building should integrate with the land, not dominate it. "You're an interesting structural engineer," he noted one evening, watching me work on a metal sculpture in my loft. "Most of you are focused on preventing failure. You seem focused on celebrating strength. Failure is inevitable," I mused, manipulating the white-hot metal with the tongs. "But catastrophic collapse is a choice. You can design a system that fails gracefully or one that collapses entirely." He smiled, understanding the metaphor. Rian didn't ask me to be fixed. He accepted my quiet intensity. He understood my need for space, my aversion to discussing family, and the profound, silent ambition that drove me. He saw Alara, the woman, not the responsible daughter. A year passed. My firm flourished. I bought a small house, a craftsman bungalow near the water, and paid for it with a wire transfer, sending the receipt to Dr. Sorensen with a single note. No approvals required. The locket was still in my desk drawer, wrapped in the velvet pouch. I opened it sometimes, just to touch the cheap, cool metal and remember the moment of absolute clarity. The first contact came 18 months after I left. It wasn't a phone call. It was a formal, heavily embossed wedding invitation sent to my old Chicago address, then forwarded by the new owner, Sloan and Marcus, at the Chicago Art Institute. The timing was calculated: mid-July, prime vacation season, impossible to ignore. My initial reaction was a cold, professional dread. I took the invitation to Dr. Sorensen. "So," she said, looking at the ornate script, "the final curtain call. They've spent 2 years trying to figure out if you were punishing them or if you were truly gone. Now they are testing the boundary. It's a command, not an invitation," I said, placing it on her desk. "They want the family portrait. They want the illusion of unity. They want me to quietly slot back into my role for the performance." "And what do you want, Alara?" I paused, considering. "I want to see Sloan. I want to see her happy. And I want them to see me, not the role I played, but the person I built. I want them to see that I didn't collapse without their approval. I ascended, then we go, but only with a contract," Dr. Sorensen replied. Over the next few weeks, we drafted my boundary protocol: sovereignty of space, fly in the day before, stay at a neutral location, the Hilton, not the family home. Depart the morning after the reception, no shared travel. Sovereignty of conversation, the topic of the past 2 years, the locket, the IOU, or the Greystone is off limits. Any attempt to discuss it will result in my immediate departure. Sovereignty of time. Attendance is limited to the ceremony and the reception. No mandatory pre-wedding brunches or post-wedding cleanup. Sovereignty of self. No emotional labor, no mediating family drama, no validating their feelings. I booked my ticket, my hotel, and a black designer dress that cost more than the IOU I had burned. I arrived in Chicago 2 days before the wedding, checking into the downtown Hilton. I had not told my parents I was coming. My first priority was seeing Sloane. I texted her, "In Chicago, need to see you, just us, your choice of place." Sloane suggested the Greystone. It felt like walking into a museum. The house was stunning, but empty of life. The antique furniture looked untouched, the surfaces pristine. Sloane opened the door looking stressed, not celebratory. "Alara, you came," she said, hugging me tightly, a hug that felt more like a drowning grab. "God, thank you." Mom's been a nightmare. She's already changed the seating chart 4 times. She's going to make me crazy. We sat in the grand, formal living room, sipping iced tea. "The house is beautiful, Sloane," I said genuinely. "It is," she admitted, running a nervous hand over the brocade sofa. "It's also an anchor I didn't ask for. I have to maintain this place. The taxes are astronomical. The utilities are a joke. I'm spending every dime I make just keeping the lights on and hiring people to dust all this stuff. Marcus hates it. We were going to sell it and buy a smaller place, but Mom and Dad went ballistic. They said it would devalue their investment in my artistic life." She looked down, her composure finally cracking. "I lost the BMW 6 months ago, repossessed. Dad refused to cover the insurance or maintenance after I dropped out of my 3rd master's program. The house isn't a gift, Alara. It's an obligation. It's the most expensive thing they've ever given me, and it cost me my freedom." I reached across the massive coffee table and took her hand. "Sloane, it doesn't have to be. You can walk away, you can sell it, and buy the little cottage you always wanted." "I can't. They're threatening to cut me off entirely. They said if I sell the Greystone, they'll cancel the entire wedding. They already spent $400,000 on the venue alone. They own me, Alara." I felt a surge of genuine compassion for my sister, the golden child who was trapped in a cage I had just escaped. "No, they don't. They only own your debt, and debt can be repaid or renegotiated." I changed the subject, talking about my work, my new home, and Rian. I didn't lecture, I simply showed her the architecture of my new, free life. The wedding day arrived. It was a spectacle of wealth and control. I walked into the Art Institute, serene and centered. Ryan had offered to come, but I had insisted on facing this alone. This was my final exam. I saw my parents across the crowded hall during the cocktail hour. My father looked older, grayer. My mother, perpetually taut, had the strained smile of a theatrical director whose lead actress was about to miss her cue. I made my way through the crowd, greeting people politely, making sure to acknowledge my parents with a simple, contained nod. My mother made her move 20 minutes later, cornering me by the floral arrangement. "Alara, you look stunning. But darling, why didn't you stay with us? We have so much room. It feels so strange, you being at the Hilton. It's a terrible waste of money, the test of the boundary." I smiled. "It's not a waste, Mom. It's my money, and I chose to spend it on my own comfort. I'm an independent adult, remember? The one who doesn't need hand-holding." I used their own words against her. She flinched. "Oh, Alara, you're still punishing us. It's been so hard. Your father and we've missed you so much. You know how much your leaving affected his blood pressure, the test of the guilt trip." "Mom, I am here for Sloane, not to assuage your blood pressure issues. I left because I needed to build a life where my success was not a burden and my worth was not a calculation. If you want a relationship with me going forward, we can discuss it in family therapy, and only after you can acknowledge the financial disparity and the emotional manipulation of the past 30 years. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "We gave Sloane a house. We gave you a beautiful heirloom and a substantial commitment for your future. Why is that not enough for you? It was never about the money, Mom. It was always about the strings. Sloane's house came with an obligation of gratitude. My IOU came with an obligation of obedience. My freedom came when I burned the IOU and recognized the locket for the cheap lie it was. Suddenly, my father appeared, his face red. "We hear you're running some frivolous architecture firm in Seattle. When are you going to get a real job, Alara? That place is a money pit, isn't it? If you hadn't left, we could have used that stock money to buy the kids a wedding gift." He had broken the neutrality clause. I looked directly at him, my expression calm. My frivolous firm, Eon Design, just landed a $15 million contract to design the new Seattle Community Library. I employ 6 people, and I am highly profitable. You and Mom, however, are now paying the taxes and maintenance on a $3.5 million house that Sloane can't afford after she lost the BMW you bought her, and she is now working 2 retail jobs to pay off the rest of her art school debt you co-signed. I paused for effect, letting the unvarnished truth land. I am not the money pit, Dad. I am the architect of my own fortune, and you have lost your ability to dictate my professional or personal life. Effective immediately, I will be leaving the reception after the main course. Do not call, do not email, and do not text. If you attempt to show up in Seattle, I will pursue legal recourse. I am done being your financial safety net and your emotional punching bag. This is my final boundary. I turned, walked to the bar, and ordered a glass of water. The dinner bell rang. The reception was a blur of forced smiles and expensive china. I sat at a table with distant cousins, focusing on their genuinely interesting lives, answering every query about my job with professional detail, and not mentioning Chicago once. My parents remained across the room, watching me with a mixture of anger, shock, and a strange kind of defeated respect. They realized, finally, that their power over me was gone. Sloane sought me out just before the cake cutting. "He told me everything you said," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "He's furious." "But he can't do anything, can he? You're untouchable." "You are too, Sloane," I said. "You just have to stop asking them for the things that come with a price tag of obedience. You don't need the Greystone. You need a life you can afford and a dream you can own." "I'm trying," she admitted. "Marcus and I are talking to a realtor, selling the house. We're going to buy a tiny condo. And I'm going back to school for accounting. Something useful, don't do something useful for them. Do something that makes you stable for you," I corrected her. "If you want to be an artist, but pay for it with your stable job, not their conditional money." I hugged her goodbye, truly wishing her well. I knew she had a long road ahead, but she had taken the first step towards self-sufficiency. At exactly 9 p.m., I quietly slipped out of the reception hall and into a waiting cab. Back in Seattle, I received one final package a week later. It was a heavy, unmarked manila envelope forwarded from my old address. Inside, I found 2 items: the original, full-page, notarized deed for the Greystone, clearly indicating the $3.5 million cost, but with a new, hastily written note attached. "They have decided that if I sell the house, they will charge me the 40% capital gains tax as well. They said it's your fault they're in this mess. Signed, Sloane." And an official bank statement, showing that my parents had completely drained their last high-interest savings account. A withdrawal of $350,000 was listed, with a memo, "Repayment of past business debt for SV." My father had lost his high-paying job 6 months ago. The Greystone was on the market, but the maintenance was bleeding them dry. They had been forced to liquidate their savings to cover a final, desperate attempt to save Sloane from a failing gallery investment they had co-signed on years before. They were not financially invincible, they were financially reckless, and my independence had simply removed the one person who could have helped them manage the collapse. I took the tarnished silver locket out of my desk drawer. I opened the velvet pouch. I walked out to my welding studio, which was now a fully functional space in my backyard. I put on my helmet and gloves. I placed the locket on my steel workbench, and I hit it with the oxyacetylene torch. The cheap silver novelty melted instantly, running like a bead of mercury. I carefully manipulated the flame, vaporizing the metal until there was nothing left but a small cooling discoloration on the steel surface, a reminder of the heat required to purify. Then, I turned my attention to a small sculpture I had been working on, a perfectly balanced mobile of steel and colored glass. The steel pieces were the strong, sharp lines of my engineering past. The glass pieces were my new aesthetic sensibility, my passion, my unconditional joy. I took a picture of the finished piece, a structure of beauty and strength, and saved it on my laptop. I then pulled up my father's email address, which I had kept for professional emergencies. I attached the picture and wrote a short, final message. Dear Richard and Beatrice, I received the information regarding the Greystone and your recent financial decisions. I have not abandoned you. I simply refuse to be your emergency fund, your financial fixer, or your emotional scapegoat any longer. Your financial distress is a direct result of the choices you made over 3 decades, choices which repeatedly favored emotional manipulation and dependency over financial responsibility and true, unconditional support. I have also attached a picture of my latest artwork. I melted the locket. Its cheap metal was symbolic of the false worth you assigned to me. The molten material is gone. I am now complete. I have built a life that is resilient, beautiful, and entirely on my own terms. I wish you both peace and health, but my boundaries remain absolute. I have transferred $3,500 to Sloane's bank account, with the memo, Moving Fund Unconditional. She is the only person in this family who is trying to build a new life with integrity. This is the final definitive entry in our family ledger. I am closing the account. Goodbye. Alara. I pressed send, then immediately deleted the email address from my contacts. I stood up, walked out of my studio, and went to the back deck. Rian was watering the garden, the setting Seattle sun catching the spray of the water in a small golden rainbow. He looked up and smiled, a genuine, open smile that asked for nothing and offered everything. You finished the mobile? He asked. Finished the mobile, closed the ledger, I replied, walking over and taking his hand, the residual scent of acetylene and clean, cool metal on my skin. The foundations are solid now. Everything else is just architecture. I no longer needed the locket as a reminder. I was the architect, the structural engineer, and the master welder of my own life. My worth was calculated by the strength of the systems I built, not by the conditional dollar amount on a paper IOU. I was free.